Desh Premio, welcome back. In our previous episode, we were looking at the 19th century when the first half, the Sikh Empire and the Maratha power waned, and the British East India Company was left almost unchallenged. And in the second half, after the First War of Independence, the lessons that the British learned from that setback and how they instituted policies and thereby bringing this civilization into a huge pressure in terms of complete dismantlement of whatever it stood for and its structures. We were talking about this in the previous episode. But today we will see that how this civilization gathered itself and once again saved itself to become the longest ever surviving civilization on the planet. And for that, the watershed year was 1893. 1893 was a transformational year for the Indic civilization in the subcontinent. It was in this year that Lokmanya Tilak, Swami Vivekananda, Madam Annie Besant, Sri Aurobindo, and Mahatma Gandhi all had historic experiences that changed the course of our history and civilization. Let's look at what happened in that year. To begin with we will have to start with Lokmanya Tilak, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Till then, the Ganesh Chaturthi was all the time a festival that was done by Hindus privately in their homes. But it was in the year 1893 that Bal Gangadhar Tilak made it a festival to be celebrated in the community. He did that because the British had banned all kinds of political meetings or any kind of nationalistic get-togethers. So he started this as a community festival so that he could get the people together and then they could sing national songs and build up the patriotic fervor. And this event that took place in 1893 when he started it has now, over 100 years and more, has become a national phenomenon. And we know it today as the way we know it in terms of how India celebrates Ganesh Chaturthi throughout the land. Another very important event of that time was that in 1893 we had the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, where Swami Vivekananda ji had attended.
Parliament of Religions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the afternoon session of the opening day today, the 11th of September, 1893. We now introduce you to Swami Vivekananda from India and request him to address us. Swami Vivekananda.
Sisters and brothers of America, I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world. I thank you in the name of the mother of religions. And I thank you in the name of the millions and millions of Hindu people of all classes and sects.
Vivekananda, towards the later part of the year, returned back to India by ship. And when he returned, by that time the word had spread about how he had positioned Hinduism in respect to the world religions and how he brought out the essence of the Sanatana Dharma. And this awakened the people and endeared them so much that when his ship landed in Chennai and he was to be received and facilitated by the local people, and there was a horse-drawn chariot that was to take him around in the city, the youth of Madras, what they did was they unyoked the horses and they pulled his chariot by themselves on the streets of Madras, Such was the rejuvenation of the soul of the people that they venerated him in such a manner that the youth then dragged his chariot with him seated on that and took him across the streets of Chennai. This is how they welcomed Sri Swami Vivekananda back when he returned from Chicago. Another very important event and a person, that is Madame Annie Besant. Annie Besant was in charge of the Theosophical Society, and she was assigned the role of spreading their gospel in this land of probably barbarians. Annie Besant arrived in India in 1893 from the Theosophical Society. Upon arrival, she quickly learned Sanskrit and also read up all the scriptures. And she stated that there was nothing the world can teach India, but there is much the world can learn from India. She had recognized that Hinduism is the soul of India. She did state that her whole life is devoted to one purpose, to give India back her ancient freedom. To that effect, in 1916, she launched the Home Rule League along with Bal Gangadhar Tilak and was jailed, but was released after a lot of protests, and she was appointed the first woman president of the Indian National Congress in 1917. At that time, the National Congress was more like a debating society. She died in 1933 at the age of 85 in Adyar near Madras and was cremated. Annie's untiring work since she arrived in 1893 helped awaken the soul of India. This is what Mahatma Gandhi said of her while paying his tributes to her immense work that she did in the service of India. Another remarkable incident is around a very great man, Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo Ghosh was born in a Bengali caste family. His father was a surgeon general and very well to do. He wanted his sons to grow up to become like English gentlemen. To that effect, he sent Aurobindo and his brothers to England, and he even ensured that Aurobindo stayed with an English family so that he could completely mold himself into the British way of life. But Aurobindo felt very claustrophobic there, and he just could not feel comfortable. He actually studied at Cambridge in King's College, and he stood 11th in his class of 250 people. But he deliberately failed his horse riding lessons so that he could come back. He returned back to India by ship, and it was in 1893 that his ship docked at the Bombay port. And when he set foot on the Indian soil again, he felt a kind of an energy that swept through him, and he felt he was back in the lap of his mother. And very soon, having arrived here, we worked with the royalty of Baroda, but very soon he engaged into nationalistic activities. He became a great freedom fighter, leading many protests and antagonizing the British to no end, to the point that the British turned him as the most dreaded nationalist and perceived in him the biggest threat to their own power. He was arrested and then he was released. He was arrested again in 1908, but then the case against him collapsed, and after an year in solitary confinement, he was then released. But during his time in jail, there was a complete transformation. Aurobindo had visions of Krishna, of Vivekananda, and during his time in the prison, he also introduced himself to a lot of the scriptures, and he received such directions that when he came out of prison, he was a completely changed man. When he was taking oath on the Gita in the courtroom, it was then that the moment started. And throughout that whole year, until he came out from a nationalist, he had now become a spiritualist. He felt that there was such deep wisdom in the civilizational heritage of this land that it had to be studied and understood, and he had to take it across. That it was upon India that it across to the rest of the world. To that end, he completely immersed himself into the scriptures. But then he gave a speech called the Uttarapara speech, which is available and also in PDF format, where he explains what happened and why this transformation. However, the Indian people were left very disappointed because his departure from the nationalist scene left a huge void. They had come to look upon him as the man who will lead them to freedom, but now it was completely left with nobody else. Till Mahatma Gandhi arrived on the scene. So, when finally Arvindo decided that political freedom is important, but there are others who will work towards it, what he needed was that he had learned through revelations that it is Sanatan Dharma, that not just India but it's the whole world that needs it, and he has to preserve and rejuvenate its teachings. So he went whole soul into Sanatan Dharma in order to be able to do a civilizational revival. So, whilst India's political freedom was at stake and those battles were being fought, he also went on to start creating an environment wherein we had to get a civilizational freedom. Talking of Mahatma Gandhi, it was also again in the year 1893 that Mahatma Gandhi, while traveling on a train, was thrown out of the compartment, the first class compartment, by a white British train conductor, and that platform was Pietermaritzburg in South Africa.
I will not leave this compartment. Where does it say? Show me. Get off my train. That's for you.
That awakened a spirit inside him, and he completely, from a legal career perspective, he abandoned that and completely immersed himself into the freedom struggle, the rights of people, and he made a huge impact upon the South African situation here. Having spent 21 years in South Africa, he then set sail to India. To the extent that Nelson Mandela claims, we got Karamchand Mohan Das Gandhi, but when we sent him back, the one who arrived in India was Mahatma Gandhi. So Mahatma Gandhi, having arrived in India, he whole soul took into the freedom movement of India. And he not only that he drove the British out of India, he also drove them away from several continents. Not to undermine the effort of many other freedom fighters who were so instrumental in bringing freedom to India, but Mahatma Gandhi's contribution also cannot be undermined and cannot be forgotten. So it was in 1893, the transformational year, that Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak brought the Ganesh festival from inside Hindu homes to the community. It was in 1893 that Swami Vivekananda gave his famous speech at the World Parliament of Religions that so awakened the soul of Bharat that the euphoric youth of Madras, upon his return, pulled his carriage through the streets of Madras. It was in 1893 that Madame Annie Besant arrived in India with an intention to change this country and ended up changing herself and immersed whole soul in the service of this nation and declared that Hinduism is the soul of India. It was in 1893 that Sri Aurobindo returned back from England, and as soon as he stepped foot on the motherland, he felt a new energy had swept through him and he had returned to the lap of his mother. It was in 1893 that Mahatma Gandhi was thrown off a train in Pietermaritzburg and the rest is history. My sincere acknowledgements to Sri Dhirendra Swarupji. And then, when we are in the 20th century, starting from the 1900s, the whole freedom movement and some issues, and of course, for the soul of India to be really awakened, it has taken even more than 120 odd years after that, and we are still in that mode. But there are some very, very important and significant events that's going to make a lot of enchanting narrative that I will share with you in the coming episodes. Thank you very much, my friends, for listening to me. Keep watching, keep supporting, and thank you so much to all of you.